Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that literally touches every single one of us. But let's be honest, it's something we almost never want to talk about: mortality. We're going to unpack a really profound perspective from Sadhguru on how we might actually shift our entire relationship with the end of life. Because usually, we treat it like this desperate, terrifying battle to the bitter end. But what if we looked at it as a natural and maybe even a graceful process? It's a heavy topic for sure, but an absolutely crucial one. So let's jump right in and explore this fascinating lens on our final chapter.
Section 1. The Ultimate Question. A Desperate Plea for a Friend.
So the source material kicks things off with a situation that is just so incredibly human and relatable. A questioner asks Sadhguru about a dear friend who is completely consumed with cancer. They ask, is there anything that I can do or she can do to come through this? And, just think about that phrasing for a second. When someone we love is sick, this is our literal first instinct. We want them to beat it. We want them to come through to the other side. It's an instinct that is totally rooted in love and this deep-seated desire for survival.
But here's where Sadhguru introduces a massive paradigm shift. He stops and challenges what coming through actually means. Obviously, the questioner wants their friend to get cured, but Sadhguru poses this alternative. What if coming through means dying peacefully? He's basically asking us to redefine what a positive outcome looks like when a situation is exceptionally severe. And that right there sets the stage for everything else we're going to talk about today.
Section 2. Fighting the Inevitable. The Reality of Human Mortality.
Now, as much as we want our loved ones to get better, the response here brings in a stark philosophical reality check. He states it plainly: people need to die. When and how is the only question. And he's not saying this to be cold or to disregard the sick friend at all. He's pointing out a foundational truth. Death is an absolute inevitability. We spend so much of our lives just kind of ignoring that fact, right? But the source emphasizes that death itself isn't the variable here. The only actual unknowns are the timing and the manner of how we go. Which brings up this massive tension between our human instincts and reality. Look, the instinct to survive is completely natural. If death comes knocking, of course we're going to do everything possible to save ourselves. But the source notes that there's a turning point. Fighting endlessly when saving a life goes way beyond what's actually possible. When a body is failing irreparably, well, turning that end-of-life stage into an endless fight is described as a horrible way to die. It basically turns a natural conclusion into a battlefield where the patient literally cannot win.
Moving on to Section 3. Living Beyond Death. The Critique of Excessive Medical Intervention. This is where the source really critiques our modern, highly medicalized approach to dying. Sadhguru shares his observations of Western geriatric care, specifically noting patients who are 85 or 90 years old stuck in prolonged hospital stays. He describes these elderly folks as having bodies just full of pipes and needles, and the goal of all this intervention often just becomes stretching life out month by month. The profound critique he offers is that through sheer medical force, people are essentially kept alive and, as he puts it, living beyond their natural time.
It creates a really stark contrast. On one hand, you've got the outcomes of excessive medical support, living beyond death, where patients might lose all their senses and forget everything. The source suggests this is essentially torture to themselves and their caregivers. But on the flip side, you have natural acceptance. This allows a person to die gracefully at a certain point, maintaining their dignity and having a peaceful conclusion. It's a tough comparison, for sure, but it really asked us to weigh the cost of medical longevity against the value of personal dignity.
To really hammer this home, Sadhguru impartially observes the reality inside some of these care settings. He points out that this excessive medical stretching doesn't just hurt the patient. Because people are kept alive when they've lost their senses, it creates an incredibly heavy environment. He notes that workers can become irritated because they're treating what he frankly calls dead bodies walking around, people who just don't understand or remember anything anymore. It's a harsh observation, but it highlights how stretching life without considering the quality of that life impacts literally everyone involved.
Section 4. Learning to Die Gracefully. A Philosophical Pivot Toward Acceptance. So if endless medical intervention isn't the answer when a body is broken beyond redemption, what is? Well, the source poses this incredibly powerful rhetorical question. Death is the last thing that you do in your life. Shouldn't you do it gracefully? Think about it. We spend our whole lives trying to do things well. We want to work well, love well, live well. Yet, when it comes to the very final act of our existence, we so often abandon any sense of grace and just panic. This perspective challenges us to prioritize the dignity of our final act just as much as everything else we've achieved. Okay, so how do we actually get there? The process outlined is pretty logical. First, yes, absolutely do everything possible to save yourself. This isn't about giving up prematurely. But step 2 is the key. Recognize if the body is truly broken beyond redemption. If it is, step 3 is to stop stretching life month by month unnecessarily with heavy medical intervention. And finally, step 4, accept death as a part of life and go through it gracefully. The source is super clear here. We aren't wishing for death, but when it definitively arrives and survival just isn't viable anymore, we need to logically transition to acceptance.
The text even proposes that passing away a bit earlier, but peacefully, is far preferable to artificially stretching out suffering. I mean, stretching a torturous life for 1 more month? It just doesn't make any sensible sense. Contrast that with dying 2 years early, but doing so gracefully. It's a really challenging thought, but it forces us to ask, are we fighting for more life, or are we just fighting for more time, regardless of the suffering it brings?
Finally, Section 5, the cue of life, a surprisingly lighthearted analogy. To help comfort those facing the end, Sadhguru uses a surprisingly relatable and honestly kind of funny analogy. He treats human mortality like a simple waiting line. He says, we're all in the queue, aren't we? So you're ahead of me, isn't that great? In any queue, you want to be ahead of everybody, isn't it? Now, he's very careful to note he isn't making fun of severe illness. Instead, he's demystifying death. By comparing it to something as mundane as standing in line at the grocery store, he takes away some of that existential terror of being the one whose time is up.
The ultimate goal of this entire perspective is really simple. Let us make the person understand it's okay, it's all right. By shifting the narrative from a terrifying fight against an unbeatable enemy to just a natural progression in the queue of life, we can actually help our loved ones. We can help them find peace in those final moments, reassuring them that letting go isn't a failure at all, but a completely natural and graceful step. And that brings us to the end. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought from today's explainer. We should understand where one thing stops and the other thing begins, isn't it? It's a profound call for discernment. At what point in our own lives, or the lives of the people we love, will we recognize when that fierce fight for survival must stop and the quiet grace of letting go must begin? Figuring out that boundary might just be the absolute key to not only dying gracefully, but living fully right up until the very end. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this complex topic, and I really encourage you to reflect on what a graceful conclusion means to you.